everybody. Welcome to this episode of Disruptive by Design. I'm sitting down today with Andrew Borene from Flashpoint. Hi, Andrew. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Kimberly.
Of course. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about cybersecurity. You're quite an expert. Can you tell us kind of a little bit about your current role at Flashpoint, and then I'll ask you about kind of what you did previously.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm the executive director for global security and international markets at Flashpoint. And as it sounds, I've kind of got two hatted roles. One of them is I work with all of our global partners. We've got about 800 customers worldwide. We do business in 50 plus countries, all of which are US and allied security partner nations. And that's predominantly that's private sector. But the global security hat is how do we protect people, assets, reputations, both in the digital space and in the real world. And then leveraging a network of trusted human colleagues across that ecosystem. And then the international markets component is I lead our commercial sales organization, which is predominantly serving Forbes 2000 global enterprises, like really big multinational corporations that have common threats in many cases to being the front line in adversarial attacks from transnational criminal organizations, ransomware groups, extortion actors, and in many cases, even state intelligence services or proxy actors on behalf of adversarial states in cyberspace.
And before you came to Flashpoint, tell us about some of your previous roles.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where I think on paper, people look at my bio or resume and think it was all planned. It was not. I think I mentioned I've been a life member of AFCEA and a reader of Signal magazine since I was a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps as a cryptologic officer. I was trained as a cryptologic officer in 2001 and 2002, and then became an all-source intelligence collections officer. And so I had to learn about all kinds of new things, HUMINT, imagery intelligence. At the time, 2003, 2004, we were just starting to use Pioneer UAVs. We call that drones now. But really one of the most amazing experiences for me that became foundational in my entire career since was I got assigned as one of the collections managers for the 1st Marine Infantry Division during the invasion of Iraq. And that really opened me up to the importance of collaboration, of cross-functional work to support a decision maker. In that case, it was General Mattis, the commanding general of the division. His deputy was General Kelly, who subsequently became Secretary of Homeland Security, and General Mattis became Secretary of Defense. But just being exposed to those types of leaders and seeing how hard they worked to make data-informed decisions with the best information and intelligence they could get at the time. Really, it kind of lit up a passion. And I went to law school after the Marines. I thought I would kind of move back into the finance world. But I ended up kind of every 2 or 3 years, I'd bounce between the government, US federal government, and private industry. And so I spent some time at IBM managing the I2 business. A lot of AFCEA folks will recognize Analyst Notebook for link analysis. I also spent some time as an open source intelligence program manager at LexisNexis, kind of taking publicly scraped data, media, et cetera, making that available for intelligence analysis. And then another private sector job I had was managing the national security group at Symantec on behalf of the CEO at the time was Greg Clark before they were acquired by Broadcom. But in that job, I managed the team that did all of the classified support to US government. So in cyberspace, over the course of that, I managed to pick up a CISSP certification with the help of one of my great friends. And for listeners that are early career, Bob Stasio if you STASIO, if you can find him on LinkedIn, he's a really amazing expert on cyber threats, cyber threat hunting, and he's the guy who helped me kind of mentored me through the CISSP certification process, and that was really valuable for understanding, because I had a very good picture of intelligence collections, intelligence operations writ large, but the cyber piece was a little new to me. And working with mentors and working with other people who could help explain things in kind of human terms to me was really radically altering. I finished my career in the federal government as a senior at National Counterterrorism Center, and then ultimately as the head of research at the National Intelligence University, where I focused on all forms, classified and unclassified, of research into intelligence as a discipline out of Bethesda. And now I'm at Flashpoint. Been here 2 years and love it. Flashpoint is a primary source collector, which really distinguishes the firm. Flashpoint also, at this point, we're the largest privately held provider of threat intelligence with that data that we collect. And I work with so many amazing people, whether they come from private sector backgrounds, having worked in a SOC someplace, or they come from a government background. It's just, I mean, pinch me. I can't believe I got such a great job with such a great bunch of people.
Oh, well, that's amazing. And it does seem like a perfectly choreographed trajectory. I
It
know
was not. There was
yeah.
so many times, and I know that this podcast also kind of helps with emerging leaders in the space. And I just want to encourage everyone, if you're listening, it doesn't always go scripted. There are scary moments between jobs, scary moments where a program gets defunded, and now you've got to kind of scramble and find the next thing. But without you asking, I have advice for all of those young AFCEANs and emerging leaders. And it is keep doing what you're passionate about, and the money will come. That is the best advice I ever got. And I got that early on in my career. And it definitely panned out and has been true.
Right. I love that. And thanks for that advice. And I guess for emerging leaders interested in cybersecurity, what would be your advice there about kind of how to either get into the industry or, use kind of, like you said, maybe their experience in intelligence, all source intelligence, or some other, intelligence field to come into cybersecurity?
Yeah. So I won't lie to you, the value of my AFCEA membership has been incredible. I'm a life member, so everywhere I go, I'm a dual national, UK resident and US citizen. I travel probably half of my time around the world with security partners and security partner countries. And AFCEA has chapters all over the world. It also is a really safe vehicle for government and military people to interact with the private sector and vice versa, because it's a non-profit. So I think what I would say is working with groups like AFCEA, and for me, there's another organization, ISC2, that's the certification body for certified information security professionals. Similarly, they've got connectivity, both government and private sector, add in academia, and technology innovation. But I think being part of those organizations, there are other ones. ISC2 is not the only one. I'll give you a couple other examples.
Yeah.
The people that do CISM, Certified Information Security Manager certification, also a really excellent credential. You don't have to have the credential to go to open meetings, to make, again, it's trusted human relationships that drive the next step. And I think increasingly just unsolicited advice for folks that want to stay in this space. The online ability to generate a resume using AI that fits the exact requirements is going to increase the competitive nature of the industry, right? Everybody's going to have a sterling resume. Everybody's going to have a sterling cover letter. It's going to look like they're perfect on paper. So I really encourage people to leverage AFCEA and other organizations to build those trusted human relationships. I've got another, I don't invent any of this stuff, but I got some other really good advice, which was, look, if security and trust is about people, then you have to make it about people. Technology alone isn't going to save us. It's not going to protect our institutions. It's not going to protect our companies. It's not going to protect soldiers, service people in the field. So what we need to do is to continue to build those trusted human relationships so that, for instance, after a breach in cyber, you know exactly who you can call for help, and you have means to get a hold of them that aren't just in the what they call the run book in the security operations center.
Right. That's really great advice. Right. And I had all these questions about cybersecurity and the report that you guys have done. So thank you for providing that passion about AFCEA. Um, it's so great to kind of hear that feedback. And I'd love to kind of delve into the report. It did catch my eye, kind of, when going through, what's out there. And for those that don't know, Flashpoint puts out an annual global threat intelligence report, and it's really a comprehensive review of how things are as far as cybersecurity trends. Can you talk about kind of how you all develop that report and the data sources that you pull from? You talked about how Flashpoint is, has the largest, private source of, or, data collection of cyber threat analysis. But can you talk about kind of how the report comes together and the data you guys pull from?
100%. Yeah. And I would add, we're not just cyber threat intelligence, we're physical security
Oh,
intelligence.
yes.
We have insight into TTPs, tactics, technologies, and procedures that threat actor groups are using, right? Not only to determine which exploits they're going to use against which vulnerabilities, but how they use them, and insight into those really hard to reach threat actor insights. If a company or a government office is held ransom or being extorted by one group, it is not necessarily the same as another group. Some groups will negotiate down in ransom, other groups will not. Some groups will start attacking and leveraging suppliers or customer chains that they pull in data that they stole in a breach. So really, our ability and we say that we're primary source collector, right? That means we're not just aggregating, buying data sets from third parties. We actually use managed attribution, the highest end technology and tradecraft that's been developed over longer than a decade now, to really dig into illicit communities and deep and dark web data, which we store. And this is getting to the answer to your question. We've got more than 3.6 petabytes of very bespoke data direct from these threat actor forums, breach forums. Compromised credentials is a really increasing area for us. And then also on the physical security side, data and insights into things like executive protection and facilities protection, right? We're not providing the human beings with badges and guns and access control systems. What we're doing is giving intelligence and insight using that data and ongoing primary source collection to inform better decision making, because an organization only has so many resources that they can deploy at any given moment. So having the really good threat intelligence, and actually here, so this is a copy of the threat intelligence report that was derived from that data. The other thing we do when we put the threat intelligence report together is we anonymize and aggregate insights from about 800 customers worldwide that are governments and large industry. And we do business in more than 50 allied and security partner countries. We take that insight and we think about what matters most to not only the CISO, or Chief Information Security Officer, but also the C-suite writ large. What matters to the board of directors, right? And increasingly, it's not just cyber threat intelligence, it's that physical security intelligence. A couple of really frightening things have happened at the C-suite level. There was the murder of the United Healthcare CEO in the United States. In Germany, the CEO of Rheinmetall was targeted by a Russian intelligence service with a contract for an assassination. And so, that physical security executive protection component really factored into this year's threat intelligence report. And then another pillar is increasingly, geopolitical risk, right? And that is, we see a lot of shifts in a very dynamic environment. We see threat, what we call kind of a rogues gallery of some cyber bad actors. And the DNI and the director of CIA just testified before Congress. And after terrorism and transnational crime, this kind of rogues gallery of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea is using proxy groups and attacks on the private sector, to accomplish state objectives. And so the geopolitical component, and another aspect of geopolitical is, things like we've seen a lot of protest activity related to world events, whether that's the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel, the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, risk to shipping in the Asia Pacific, or to commerce as a result of tensions between the Chinese Navy and Asia Pacific partners. And so you put that together, and like I said, you kind of get these three components of a converging threat picture that mandates that the C-suite and the board of directors in the private sector, or the senior most leaders in a government office or agency, need to be aware of not only that cyber threat, but the physical threat and then the geopolitical risk. So it's been exciting, but I think this one here this year is probably the first year where it really demonstrates how important it is that security teams know how to talk to their senior most stakeholders and protect them.
Right. And it is interesting to hear about that kind of melding of, it's not just cybersecurity, but it's this physical threat and then the geopolitical risks, kind of to have that all, melded into, areas that people really need to look at. Can we jump into kind of the cybersecurity side and talk
Absolutely.
about kind of the trends there? What are you guys seeing as far as, the key, threats or trends?
So I think first and foremost, the one that I find most frightening is compromised credentials. Because compromised credentials, that takes all for like the really detailed ones and zeros crowd. I mean, that's taking cookie sessions, IP addresses, the whole thing, so that you don't need a username and password. You are accessing somebody's account, and that compromised credentials, we saw a 33% jump in our primary source collection of compromised credentials. We use that then to help inform teams. Like if it's a credential for a financial services institution, we share that with them as soon as we see it. They can then lock up an account, prevent access by an unauthorized user. And we also see those compromised credentials being used as a vehicle for other cyber exploits to be introduced into a system. So I think that probably is the biggest, most kind of frightening, is compromised credentials. And again, I think what that informs on the next step side is, yep, we're going to keep looking for those. And on behalf of our customers, we're going to keep, every time we see something that could impact them, letting them know as quickly as possible. Info stealers is another one, like the types of malware being used. And this trend on info stealers is interesting because that's up 75%. So of the stolen credentials, using those info stealers it's not just shutting down, locking up data and saying, hey, we will unlock you if you pay ransom. It's actually stealing information. And then regardless of if the ransom is paid or not, that data can end up having a second life on the dark web. So if you think about some of these really horrific breaches, there was a healthcare breach that included even right down to the granular level of, pictures of cancer patients' treatment.
Wow.
That's totally inappropriate, but there it is. It's out there. It's having a second life on the internet. Breach data sets that include people's personally identifiable information, a really sensitive PII. That can then be used to fuel future social engineering campaigns, right? And so I think that the info stealers rise is another aspect that we saw, and that I anticipate continue to see rising, especially when we see this increase in kind of democratization of the use of AI to generate malicious code, and using AI and things like deepfakes to generate spoofs and social engineering and ways of tricking the CFO into making a payment that the CEO didn't really want, but a threat actor group pretended to be the CEO, and they did it really credibly, and they did it through a personal SMS text because they had the phone numbers that came out of a different breach data set due to info stealing. So I think these are trends that threat actors are advancing, and then on the plus side, when you use this bespoke data that we collect, it empowers us to collect more of it if it's relevant to a customer, but also leverage the holdings that we do have to kind of inform, here's where an attack may be coming from. Here are the types of things where they're trying to target your specific executives and where we see some exposure. And then in terms of vulnerabilities, like the vulnerabilities themselves, the way they get kind of prioritized for patch or remediation, a sophisticated threat actor, it doesn't matter. It could be a criminal group, could be a state service, could be a proxy of a state service. What they're doing is they're not going to only go for the super high vulnerabilities. They're going to look and say, hey, and have chatter inside of their own closed, Telegram or their closed forum on the dark web. And they're going to say, hey, we've identified and we want to get after these 8 or 10 medium priority vulnerabilities. And so that's where the intelligence aspect informs the traditional IT security or kind of SOC activity. And then, we see an increasing trend in ransomware. We've seen increased sophistication. I talked about it a little bit earlier about how we see this. I've referred to it myself as it's an extortion network. It's not just ransomware. It's not just ransomware as a service. It is outright extortion because some of these groups, particularly the very large, well-funded ones, and more of them are becoming well-funded because they finance future operations with past ransomware takedowns. So a company pays a ransom, that group that got the ransom in crypto, then in just like a business, except they're illegal business and they're criminals, is investing that into developing future resources, future campaigns, and farming it out. Even we see on the dark web, some of the really most sophisticated groups selling exploits, selling vulnerability data to kind of a network of smaller or startup ransomware actors. And so I think that, again, those are the trends that are scary. But on the upside, using good threat intelligence that's not just scraping the internet, but actually digging into closed communities, using open source intelligence tools and tradecraft. I think that's the future, and I think it actually provides also a defender's advantage, just the same as it provides an attacker's advantage.
Right, sure. And given the comprehensiveness of your analysis and the reporting, was there anything that surprised you in the findings, or is it mostly just trends that we've seen before or started to see, and they're just increasing?
No, I think what I'm seeing and what I think our team would agree is that there's an increasing awareness, particularly in the private sector, that like a CVSS score alone is not an adequate way to prioritize remediation and patching, right? So understanding where and how a threat actor, again, criminal, state, proxy, doesn't matter, but agnostically understanding where they may attack, like they might attack a lower CVSS score vulnerability. And it helps if it was a castle, defend this side door, not the front door, or hey, the CVSS score would indicate that the back door needs to be defended. Well, actually, what we're seeing is this trend. And so I think it informs better use of limited resources on the defense side when you have some insight into what the threat actors are looking at from their own attacks. And I think, I wouldn't say surprising, but positively, we are seeing an increasing awareness of this in the private sector. Here in the United States, or for any of the allies, the private sector is not controlled by the government, right? And so the private sector becomes the front line in kind of this, what we refer to here as a hybrid Cold War. You have those hostile states, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, financing campaigns. And if they're going after critical infrastructure in the United States and the free world, that means that they're going to be attacking a private sector company, not necessarily a government-owned piece of infrastructure. So it's a scary trend, but there's also a lot of optimism in it, in that the private sector is recognizing, and these governments are recognizing that private industry is the front line. It is where the attacks occur. And so the private sector and it's a buzzword, gets used a lot, public-private partnerships. But the private sector I see very much stepping up willingly, and it's a positive trend that, cross-silo, cross-functional collaboration on the defense is also an increasing trend.
Right, sure. Yeah, I don't know that I'd heard that before, a new hybrid Cold War and kind of, what that was, but I'm glad to hear that companies in the private sector are becoming more and more aware of this. Is there anything else that, companies across the world would need to know about this, hybrid Cold War kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think one observation that we've had is kind of thinking hybrid Cold War. The old Cold War, the first one, was largely Russia, U.S., and it was bipolar. Increasingly, I think you see developing a few different hubs of kind of geopolitical power. There's a Communist Party of China direction on this, which largely has been focused on espionage and intellectual property theft to fuel Chinese economic advantage. There's been kind of a Russian flavor of this, which is using proxies and transnational crime as a kind of a resource on the state. And then Iran and North Korea often use ransomware to kind of fuel. They're barred from the licit or legitimate economy, so they use some of these to finance government functions through ransomware. But on the Russian front, and this is an interesting case study, last summer there was a really complex prisoner swap between it involved United States, European countries, and some Russian nationals. And the interesting thing on the prisoner swap is that when it was negotiated, the Russian government demanded 2 convicted cyber criminals be repatriated to Russia.
Wow.
And one was for fraud, one was for theft. But this was on the order of what they got convicted for was, tens of millions. But what they actually did may have been considerably larger than that. They were serving sentences in the United States. And in the old Cold War, you would have seen that type of prisoner swap around things like nuclear scientists or spies or generals. But this time, the Russian government repatriated just some transnational criminals. And so I think what that says to us is, wow, it looks like this proxy ransomware, proxy extortion, proxy cybercrime, proxy fraud is part of a hybrid environment that attacks the private sector, attacks private individuals, and that's just one aspect of it. The other aspect of when we think about hybridity, or what is hybrid, last year, just in the summer, NATO published what's called a reference curriculum on hybrid warfare and hybrid threats, and that was largely about trends that they have observed with the Russian government and Russian military, Russian intelligence services using tactics and techniques and operations below the threshold of war, but highly disruptive to European interests. You saw it in Ukraine before the invasion of Ukraine militarily. There were cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. There were and misinformation campaigns. You saw this in other countries, Georgia on the cyber front. And if you think about, an old-fashioned word, more of a wartime word of sabotage, in places like Bulgaria and even in Germany and some of the other European defense industrial base entities, there have been, suspicious fires on factory floors, harassment of employees in ammunition manufacturing or defense technology manufacturing facilities. I mentioned that contract that was taken out on the Rheinmetall CEO in Germany. And so it is really, other terms for it are gray zone warfare. Some people use irregular warfare. But at the end of the day, it removes and blurs a lot of the traditional lines for geopolitical conflict. And I think there is very much a rising awareness of how important it is that public and private sector interests, particularly on critical infrastructure and critical capabilities like financial services, energy, food distribution, space technology for communications, or GPS, for instance, right? And I think those types of capabilities need to be defended in this new environment.
Right. And that physical security, that's, I think, aside. I mean, I think in the last couple of years, I've become more familiar with it. Certainly, from in the U.S. CISA's work to identify the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and we've saw the attacks on pipeline and gas storage facilities. But I'm glad to hear that people are becoming more aware of kind of that need for physical security. But that is interesting that it's kind of all melding to be kind of this more sophisticated environment.
Yeah,
Um,
it really is. And then when it comes to critical infrastructure this is my own assessment, not Flashpoint's, but I would argue that not all critical infrastructure is equal,
mm,
right? If energy has a bad day, everybody has a bad day. If
yeah,
what we call GPS in the US, what the Europeans kind of think of as timing and geolocation, but space-based communications infrastructure, space-based position timing or GPS, if those systems go down, again, just about everybody's going to be having a bad day. And so, I think, again, an awareness of that informs, so having an intelligence-driven approach for what areas might be attacked by threats informs better use of limited, defender capabilities,
mm,
whether that's in physical space or in cyber, in the digital realm. It provides for more effective security. It
right.
also and it also informs the C-suite, the board of directors, or senior government people with budget discretion to say, hey, let's invest in this area because it's going to have a higher impact on our defensibility and our resilience. So, I'm actually very optimistic on the defense side
Mm,
of this because with an intelligence-driven approach, we can better allocate resources to be more efficient and more effective.
mm, yeah, absolutely. One thing I did want to ask you about when you were speaking about Russia and kind of the government of Russia or state-backed actors, especially in cyber warfare. That's kind of a known entity over several years. Um, but can you talk about one of the trend that you guys are seeing? I kind of had heard in the past that I don't know if it was like an unspoken code or if it reflects the power of the government of Russia as far as cyber warfare. But threat actors kind of avoided attacks on Russian organizations or even the Russian government. I think there was a report of, kind of inherent Windows related applications in Russia that, kind of protected them. Can you talk about that aspect? But then people are no longer avoiding attacks on Russia, threat actors. Can you talk about kind of that trend and kind of what was before and what shift you're seeing?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I see a trend that Russia is, increasingly being attacked or vulnerable. We've seen some data that indicates actually a number of the really most sophisticated criminal threat actor groups made some shifts. There were announcements, for instance, that because there was an issue about kind of I guess, courtesy among thieves, if you will, that
Right.
threat actor groups wouldn't be attacking children's healthcare systems or just some really and after the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation had disrupted an attack, one of these large groups said, "Hey, the only rule now is that we're not going to attack CIS member states, and that's basically Russia and Belarus. So
Mm,
we're not going to attack critical infrastructure or companies inside Russia or Belarus." And so I think in some ways that's an indicator of just how prolifically cybercrime and these proxy transnational threat groups get shelter within adversary space, right? Very tough to extradite a cyber criminal if they are in Belarus or Russia. Very tough to extradite a proxy actor if they are in North Korea or Iran, right? Even if they don't have direct support from one of those governments, that prosecution becomes difficult. So I think I think that the threats from these rogue cyber actors and from the back to geopolitics. But if we've also seen it in Africa, in some of the ungoverned spaces in Africa, where a criminal group will base its activities from a place that's very hard to reach or might be a
Mm.
conflict zone, and that also makes prosecutions difficult, and makes kind of interdiction difficult. So back to the importance of the threat intelligence is knowing who you're up against, where they might be, ideally who they are and what tactics and techniques they're using is going to inform much better use of limited defensive resources.
Right, sure. And the report is global and kind of takes a global view. But I thought it was interesting that one of the trends you saw was that in the US, we have the highest share of data breaches. I think you all found that's about 63% based on publicly reported data, which could be a different numbers. But can you talk about what it is about the US that we have this highest share of data breaches, and maybe what could change about that?
Well, I think being the United States place is really the leading economy and source of innovation in technology makes it a very appealing target. And if you, even with the different motivations, right? If it's the Communist Party of China trying to steal technology, replicate it, and put it back into the international marketplace, right? That's a breach that they want to use for a different purpose, but it's still a breach. The the value of what gets stolen is one component, right? And the capacity to pay, right? If you are ransoming a company that doesn't have access to ability to pay, or doesn't have access to cyber insurance or cyber incident response, like it doesn't. I guess if you want crime to pay, you want to go after rich entities,
Right.
and a lot of those are in the United States. The other reason, and this has been a recurring thing, IT security professionals and for decades have been saying it in many ways. And this is not my quote. This is the former director of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. Is Americans seem to be gold medal world champions of clicking links
Mm.
before they investigate. So they're the that is another trend I think we see improving is workforce awareness, and even just personal awareness about not clicking suspicious links, double checking that they have logged in with multi-factor authentication before you go to the next step, and having kind of a healthy suspicion of interactions on the internet. So I think phishing and spear phishing is a very frequent vector. So it's this back to hybrid. It's a combination of social engineering with those
Yeah.
technology exploits attacking key vulnerabilities. But I think an interesting trend is that in America, I think the last several years and a number of really big disruptive breaches have started to kind of inform better cyber hygiene at all levels.
Right. Yeah, and that is great wisdom from NCTC, and really what we hear from CIOs and CISOs, kind of how to make us less vulnerable for that social engineering part. And I feel like maybe just the sheer number of daily attacks, hopefully the country as a whole is getting better about being aware about that. Are there any other trends from the report that you wanted to highlight?
I think, a trend, and I wrote a piece in the report on the rise of professional open source intelligence. And I think that's one where, it's drawing that distinction and educating security leaders that word OSINT, it gets thrown around a lot. In many cases, it can mean, hey, I did some research online, or, a company that aggregates multiple vendor data into one big data set. But what I've been observing and what I think is a need is an increasing focus on professional open source intelligence, and it can come from the industry side through groups like AFCEA, and ISC2, and other places where industry can come together, and even some of these other OSINT groups, like you've probably heard of Bellingcat in the doing OSINT that supports kind of transparency and exposes threat actor activity. The other one is, the Royal United Services Institute in the United Kingdom, RUSI, had an open source intelligence cell that was doing some work. So there's the private sector side of it, folks like us at Flashpoint, and then there's also kind of a broader collective that can look at problems, share the information. But when I say professional, what I'm talking about is ethical and legally compliant open source intelligence collection, processing, and dissemination. Because if it's done professionally and with the ability to verify and validate where the data came from, how it was collected, then it can be much more effectively used if a prosecution is needed. Or another component of that is privacy protection. There are constitutional protections in the United States that every American has as a right. And in Europe, you have GDPR, and then you have individual member state regulations that can vary country by country. So having a professional ethos that understands at a sophisticated level how to operate in that environment, protect those privacy concerns at the same time as collect and aggregate data on threats is really vital. So I think that's another trend is this notion of a professionalization of open source intelligence, or OSINT, as a craft that supports not just governments, but also private sector entities.
Right. That is definitely an important point. And I don't know that I had heard that before, kind of that, the kind of push for and the importance of that professional, ethos, that ethical side, and kind of making sure that it can lead to, that it's legally compliant and lead to, help in, prosecution, and also balance that privacy side. That is a great point. And kind of for those in the intelligence community, to intelligence analysts who work with all types of, all source intelligence, can you talk about the importance of OSINT related to cybersecurity, kind of that side of things?
Yeah. Again, OSINT, if you think about it on a US basis, open source intelligence was just recently identified as its own standalone functional pillar of intelligence, along with signals intelligence, human source intelligence, geospatial intelligence. And so they also crafted some policies around commercially available information. Historically, OSINT was seen as publicly available information only, meaning things that were just openly observable on the internet. Commercially available information means that the US government can leverage the same types of tools that a private sector entity can leverage through commercially available means. And I think that's a really important maturity component. My assessment is that will expand into other allied countries like the Five Eyes: Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. We will also see it in other European states about leveraging commercially available resources to support that OSINT function as a key capability. So that's a trend, that's less on the threat intelligence side, more on the how the intelligence is collected and disseminated side. But I think, again, bringing full commercial resources to bear is really important for governments. And then, kind of back to the sharing of information across that public-private divide or across international boundaries. When open source intelligence is leveraged, it's usually much easier to share. You don't have to go through a whole bunch of declassification to share a report or share a collected piece of data if it came from OSINT. And so it can be a faster turnaround for unified threat intelligence.
Right, absolutely. Well, those are all my questions, Andrew. I could probably fire you with questions all day. It's so fascinating. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight or talk about?
No, I really appreciate it. Long-time Signal reader, long-time member. Nice to be on your podcast, and hope to see anybody that heard this at an AFCEA meeting, whether it's in Europe or the United States or somewhere out in Asia Pacific. It'd be great. I'm very grateful for everything AFCEA has done for my career.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing your time today and your expertise. I really appreciate it. And
Thanks,
we'll put a link to the report as well.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.